coloring Easter eggs, enjoying daffodils and lilies, making hot cross buns with my mother, and of course, hunting for treats left by the Easter bunny, or maybe I should say the Ostara bunny. When I was young, I enjoyed this holy day, harbinger of spring and renewal. After snowy Iowa winters such as I knew, I was desperate for that resurrection of dry sticks. And like the poet Theodore Rothko, I felt that I too was coming back to life as cut stems rose on lopped limbs to new life. When lawns and trees began to hint of spring greens and the early crocuses promised the return of life and beauty, I felt my own energy and optimism rising. But as I grew older, Easter itself lost some of its luster. It was hard for me to understand what others saw as good in Good Friday, the day that gentle Jesus was murdered on the cross. Atonement theology, the idea that people had inherited and accumulated a debt of sin too large ever to be repaid, and that Jesus' crucifixion somehow wiped the slate clean for all of us, this just did not compute for my young mind. I could empathize with Jesus' followers, mourning his tragic loss. But what was all this business about an empty tomb? I didn't know then that the theology of atonement was a late development in Christianity, that there has always been other ways of following Jesus and understanding his death. I didn't know that his crucifixion and resurrection received far less attention in the first millennium, the first 1,000 years after his death, than his teachings about how to live and the promise that this way of life offered for all on earth. So I became drawn to other exemplars, people perhaps less complicated by 2,000 years of conflicting interpretations and traditions. My mother was a student of nonviolence. Biographies of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King were strewn about our home. I don't think I had read them for myself yet, but by junior high, I was familiar enough with who these figures were to name my gerbils after them. And not just Gandhi and King. One gerbil was Mahatma Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. The other was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I think Gandhi was the thinner gerbil. Like Jesus, the real Gandhi and King died while working for the betterment of their people, but we remember them for what they embodied in their lives. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "My life is an indivisible whole, and all my attitudes run into one another, and they all have their rise in my insatiable love for mankind." As a young adult, when I finally did start reading those biographies of Gandhi and King, I think it was not only Gandhi's incredible achievements that attracted me, the way he led the people of India to freedom without firing a single shot. But this earnest quality that he exuded really drew me. He was determined to make his life an indivisible whole, used for the good of all. I think this is a yearning that resonates with many young people, and I believe it's natural to human beings. This yearning doesn't always survive into so-called maturity, at least not without getting buried deep inside. The demands of survival, the pervasive materialism in our culture, and even frustration with finding one's true calling. All of these can dim the quest for an authentic, committed life. At its best, I believe that's a powerful role that communities like Westside can play. We can help one another nurture and maintain that desire that each of us has to orient our lives by our highest principles and to revive that desire when it flags. To live from the broadest of loyalties to humankind and our fellow beings, giving one another courage to go against the grain of our individualistic culture. I certainly wanted to give my whole life to worthy purposes. I wanted to be all in, not just a spectator or joyrider in life, but living a life of commitment. It's one of the reasons I was drawn to meditation teacher Eknath Ishran. He urged young people like me to make your life a work of art, and to be a good trustee of our lives. Ishran, who grew up in Gandhi's India and had been deeply influenced by him, was kind of riffing on Gandhi's idea of trusteeship, expanding it beyond the sense that those with greater wealth should hold that wealth in trust for the good of the whole community. For Ishran, trusteeship was not just about the rich sharing wealth. It was about how each one of us artfully makes decisions every day regarding the use of our time, our abilities, and our resources. And doing so in the service of the greater good, including living lightly on the earth, for whom we are all trustees. Well, career-wise, I was never quite sure as a young adult that I had found my calling, but I did decent work for nonprofit organizations. Through my church, I devoted my volunteer energies to racial justice, nonviolence and anti-war activism, and later serving on the board. I tried to be a good trustee of the earth, too, not buying things I didn't need, and when I needed a new car, doing the you thing and buying a hybrid. But perhaps the clearest way for me at that time to make artful choices and give my whole life was in my charitable giving. As pledge season was nearing here at Westside, I actually dug back through my old spreadsheets. I have these spreadsheets going way back, where the evidence of my first efforts in this area lies. And I looked at the hard numbers on the page of how I had made those decisions. Each year, I tracked the cash flow of my modest 20-something income and my also relatively modest living expenses, and then I pinpointed the difference and decided how much I could pledge to my church. I looked back as far as 2000 and saw that my pledge simply appeared in my basic expenses estimate. It wasn't part of my plan for how I would use my discretionary income, because the church was a core commitment in my life. I didn't view it as an extra. My giving patterns evolved over time. I began setting a goal based on my income and expenses for each year for a certain percentage of my income that I wanted to devote to charitable giving. My church pledge always came first, and it was by far my largest investment of funds. I literally had like a numbered, prioritized list of things on my spreadsheet. As my income gradually grew, each year I upped the percentage of my income that went to giving, and my church pledge ballooned. Now, looking back, I was reminded that there also was a year when I took a job that I was excited about and took a bit of a pay cut to do it. And so I had to reduce the amount of charitable giving I could do and the number of causes I was supporting. But generally, the trend was that the amount I gave and the number of causes on the list kept growing. You know how you give to a few worthy things and then suddenly your mailbox is flooded with appeals for other worthy things. My church remained far and away my top priority for financial giving because I was all in with that community. It was that community and tradition which supported my discernment about my vocation, which gave me outlets for activism and volunteering, and which protected me from the cynicism of the world. In other words, my church helped me be a good trustee of my entire life. And that's what I wanted, for my life to be well used, driven by that kind of insatiable love for mankind of which Gandhi spoke, helping to bring into being a social order in which both people and the earth could flourish. Well, it turns out I didn't need to turn to Hindus like Gandhi and Ishran to find such role models. As theologians Rebecca Parker and Rita Nakashima Brock discovered, the Christian tradition was focused in its entire first millennium not on the image of Jesus' crucifixion and death or his resurrection, but on creating paradise right here on earth. During a 5-year pilgrimage studying early Christian art in the Western world, Parker and Brock could not find the Good Friday images that they expected of Jesus' suffering and death. Instead, the early Christian sanctuaries they visited were overwhelmingly adorned with images of a present paradise. In the early church, they write, paradise, first and foremost, was this world, permeated and blessed by the Spirit of God. They describe the images that they discovered of pastoral landscapes, the orchards, the clear night skies, and teeming waters of the Mediterranean world as if they were lit by a power from within. Sparkling mosaics and vivid colors captured the world's luminosity in this art. The book that this pair developed after this pilgrimage gives its thesis right in the title, Saving Paradise: How Christianity Traded Love of This World for Crucifixion and Empire. The image of the Garden of Eden, they came to understand, had been used not only by Hebrew prophets, but also early Christians to show that another world was possible, a contrast to the wars and exploitations that people saw daily. Within their church communities, Parker and Brock write, Christians in the first millennium sought to help life flourish in the face of imperial power, violence, and death. The great irony is that a religion that grew up as a way to counter and resist empire was eventually co-opted and corrupted, used to justify a culture of violence and many wars. So that it is considered perfectly normal to sing the kind of hymns that made me cringe as an adolescent in a Protestant church. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. So that, as Parker and Brock put it, we live now within the dominant culture of the West and the aftermath of the closing of paradise. We live with the legacy of militarism, racism, and exploitation of the earth and its peoples that has put paradise at risk. The first Universalists were surely unfamiliar with all of these twists and turns of Christian history. They were a much later variety of Christianity, but they sprang from that same hidden aquifer of love and resistance to oppression and commitment to creating heaven on earth that animated Jesus and his early followers. The English mystic and Universalist Jane Lead believed that paradise could be now, and our own lives could be part of the renewal of paradise. Salvation, in her view, Brock and Parker note, was not about sin or redemptive sacrifice, but reopening the Garden of Eden and the restoration of humanity's dignity, creativity, and responsibility in splendid diversity right here and now. I'm particularly fond of Jose Ballou, who was an early circuit-riding Universalist preacher here in America. He emphasized that heaven and hell are what we create here on earth in this lifetime. And he flatly rejected atonement theology, the doctrine that Jesus' violent death was somehow saving humanity through a divine method of accounting for sin. Rather, Ballou emphasized what saved us, what showed us how we could save the world and make it a paradise like the mythical first garden, is embodying creative love and justice the way that Jesus did in his life. The way that we Unitarian Universalists today still work together to do, as we stand on the side of love, or teach on the side of love, or love those neighbors that not everyone finds lovable. This is how we make our garden grow. Now, I don't mean to dismiss that Jesus' death may have meaning for those who find the greatest value in the religion he practiced, rather than the religion that later grew up around him. Although I'm certainly glad that our tradition focuses on how we can follow his example of radical love, it's interesting to discover the various ways that followers of his in different times and places have understood the meaning of his death. In her exploration of the Gnostic Gospels, a diverse and often mystical set of texts that didn't make the cut to be included in the official canon, the Bible, scholar Elaine Pagels conveys the early Christian landscape. Self-named Orthodox Christians advocated for the martyrdom of persecuted Christians, believing that by embracing death, they followed Jesus' example and were saved. So-called Gnostic voices, in contrast, expressed a variety of attitudes toward martyrdom, many unwilling to embrace it in the same way, certainly not for the same reasons. They saw Jesus' death not as a sacrifice to forgive humanity's sins, but as the occasion, as Pagels puts it, when Jesus transcended human nature so that he could prevail over death by divine power. In this view, his death was when his spiritual nature, our spiritual nature, was most markedly revealed. One of these long-suppressed books, or Gnostic Gospels, goes so far as to depict Jesus as glad and laughing on the cross, a radiant being of light. When I approach Jesus through the same lens of ahimsa, or nonviolence, by which I understand the choices of Mahatma Gandhi or Dr. King, I can better comprehend how Jesus might be shown as glad and laughing on the cross. Because the empire may have killed him, just as people more comfortable with the status quo killed Gandhi and King. But nothing could kill the transforming love that such people unleash in the world. Nothing could keep those ripples of courage and unfailing love from going outward in time and space. Each of these deaths was, in my understanding, tragic, and yet I also find something beautiful, something moving, in the way these exemplars were so committed to their vision of self-determination for the people of India, of multiracial beloved community here in our country, of loving thy every type of unsavory neighbor in Jesus' time, so committed that they did not flinch when the risks of continuing their activism grew exponentially. To build a new way beyond empire, a way of love, they were willing to give their whole lives, if that is what it came to. Each one of them was all in. This level of commitment entailed a willingness to take risks. Indeed, Jesus, Gandhi, and King not only risked their whole lives, they ultimately lost them to their cause. I doubt any one of them would question whether it was worth it. We all have to decide for ourselves just how much we are willing to risk, and very few of us, fortunately, face the prospect of losing our lives as a price for following our principles. But if we are going to go all in, we know it won't necessarily be easy or without loss. I'm reminded of a quote often attributed to the writer Anais Nin. And the time came when the risk it took to remain in a tightly closed bud became infinitely more painful than the risk it took to blossom. Whether we here at Westside stay curled in our tightly closed bud, isolated from even that which is right around us, or whether we choose to bloom open more and more, of course, there is still risk in life. The flower in either form can be cut from its stem, its life literally cut short. And Westside already knows something of risk. Risk has been the companion of this community at every stage of its development. From that first meeting that Jerry Rossing called to explore the establishment of a UU church on the west side of Fort Worth 20-some years ago, to the decision that you all made last year to end the lease with the Angel Montessori School in the summer of 2018. Most of you probably know that we are forgoing that income from our renter for the greater use of our building to carry out our mission and welcome all who might want to join us. We do not want to remain in the tightly closed bud here. We want to take the risk of blossoming. We want the ripples of Jesus, Gandhi, King, and so many other luminaries to ripple through this place and out into our wider community and world with our active participation in creating paradise right here. So, I don't want to shy away from risk and resurrection. I rejoice in the resurrection of the green blades of spring rising from the ground. I catch the scent of earnest commitment rising among our people here at Westside and in this country more generally, and it is tantalizing. I am hungry and hopeful for a resurrection of love in this world. I'm ready for more and more people to believe that another world is possible right here and to help create paradise. I am all in with you. You have already taken some risks as a congregation. Are you all in? Are you ready for this resurrection? I hope that Westside is a place that helps you give your whole life. I hope that you will want to participate in every way that calls to you through this community. And I hope that you will invest in what we can be as a community, going all in your pledge. Because this community is not just a haven for those of us already here. It is a point of leverage for building paradise in the world. I can think of no better way to honor the life and death of Jesus or to resurrect his radical love than to give our whole lives to that work. May it be so. Amen. I invite you to rise in body or spirit for our closing hymn, number 266, Now the Green Blade Riseth.